I'm John Rodgers from Cuyahoga Falls, and I have with me today Lou Brazenly from Copley. And we are representing the Portage Trail group of the Sierra Club. Now the way this works is when you hear Lou Brazenly's voice, that will be the voice and the words of John Muir. And our title today is Apostle of Wilderness, John Muir. Take off your shoes, for the ground on which you stand is holy. That command is from the book of Exodus in the Bible. And following that lead, Elizabeth Barrett Browning wrote these words: "Earth's crammed with heaven, and every common bush afire with God. But only he who sees takes off his shoes. The rest sit round it and pluck blackberries." Now we want to show you some of this holy ground, not of Bible lands, but of this continent, including Ohio. We've got enough blackberry pickers. We need those who are attuned to the presence of holy ground and want to keep some of it holy. Let's let Stuart Udall, former Secretary of the Interior, introduce our principal character. And those are the beautiful Yosemite Falls that you're looking at. And here is our character. Between 1867, when Alaska was purchased from Russia, and 1869, when the Golden Spike wedded the coast with a transcontinental railroad, something of uncelebrated significance occurred, and we should take note of it. A man walked into California. It was 1868. His name was John Muir, and though it is possible, it is quite unlikely another man has lived in this country who loved the wilderness as much. And let's add, and knew it so well and appreciated its compelling beauty so much. Through his words and pictures of some of his country and ours, let his beauty and greatness and strength touch you.
No synonym for God is so perfect as beauty, whether as seen carving the lines of the mountains with glaciers, or gathering matter into stars, or planning the movements of water, or gardening, still all is beauty.
All through John Muir's writings, you'll find references to God. But his God is creative and a constant part of him. His early religious life was harsh and without joy, but he retained his basic beliefs and threw away the trappings. Now, all of the words of John Muir that you hear were written between 1885 and 1914. John Muir was born in Dunbar, Scotland, but moved at the age of 11 with his family to the wilderness frontier of Wisconsin in 1849, right along this lake, which was called Enos Lake. It's called Enos Lake now. It was called Fountain Lake at the time. It's northeast of Portage, Wisconsin, and it was the site of the family's first Wisconsin farm. That lake is the one that first stirred John Muir's thoughts towards ecology and the interlocking web of life. And the next farm was a good one. It still is. And this is the home and the barn. They're about 2/3 original with the Muirs. He was quite an inventor, carved wooden clocks, gears and all, and displayed some at Wisconsin state fairs. This studying machine was invented and carved by John Muir. You can still see it at the Wisconsin Historical Society Museum at Madison. He was progressing very nicely in an industrial establishment when an accident nearly blinded him. After he recovered his sight, he bid that life farewell forever. Shortly thereafter, in 1867, he went on a plant and experience gathering walk through Kentucky, which you're looking at, Tennessee, Georgia, and into Florida, a 1,000-mile walk to the Gulf. Invariably, John Muir considered the forest that he happened to be in as the grandest one that God had ever created. The forests of Kentucky, which you saw, through which he passed, receive acclaim as did the Spanish moss-spangled live oaks of the Georgia low country. Muir spent time living in Bonaventure Cemetery at Savannah, Georgia, while waiting for a packet of money from his brother. Living in the cemetery protected him from marauding bands which were prevalent in the post-Civil War days. Now, having contracted malaria in Florida, John Muir turned his back on his planned destination, which was South America, and turned west to a valley he'd heard about, Yosemite. Later, he wrote,
Yosemite Park is a place of rest, a refuge from the roar and dust and weary, nervous, wasting work of the lowlands, in which one gains the advantages of both solitude and society. Nowhere will you find more company of a soothing, peace-be-still kind. Your animal fellow beings, so seldom regarded in civilization, and every rock brow and mountain stream and lake, and every plant soon come to be regarded as brothers. Even one learns to like the storms and clouds and tireless winds. This one noble park is big enough and rich enough for a whole life of study and aesthetic enjoyment. It is good for everybody, no matter how benumbed with care, encrusted with mail of business habits, like a tree with bark, none can escape its charm.
This is Yosemite Valley, the central point in Yosemite National Park. It was a California state park when Muir urged and finally got the surrounding areas into a national park. The valley later became a part of that park. The floor of the valley is 4,000 feet above sea level. El Capitan, that's the cliffs, rise 3,000 feet, and Half Dome, that's the half mountain that you've seen, rises 4,800 feet from that valley. Yosemite Falls is 2,425 feet high, while Bridal Veil is only 620. The falls you're looking at now are the lower falls of the Yosemite. By contrast, Niagara Falls is about 180 feet high. Now let's look at a few views while we hear Muir's classic description of this glorious valley.
It is easier to feel than to realize or in any way explain Yosemite grandeur. The magnitudes of the rocks and trees and streams are so delicately harmonized they are mostly hidden. Sheer precipices 3,000 feet high are fringed with tall trees, growing close like grass on the brow of a lowland hill. And extending along the feet of these precipices a ribbon of meadow a mile wide and 7 or 8 long. Waterfalls 500 to 1,000 or 2,000 feet high are so subordinated to the mighty cliffs over which they pour that they seem like wisps of smoke, gentle as floating clouds, though their voices fill the valley and make the rocks tremble. The mountains, too, along the eastern sky, and the domes in front of them, tend yet more to hide the grandeur of the Yosemite Temple and make it appear as a subdued subordinate feature of the vast harmonious landscape. Thus, every attempt to appreciate any one feature is beaten down by the overwhelming influence of all the others.
This is a high country lake, High Sierra Lake, Tenian Lake, named for an Indian chief. John Muir once had a cabin in Yosemite Valley with a full view of Yosemite Falls. Just walk out the door and there it was, just like you're seeing it. He was definitely attuned to the Sierra Nevada and especially to this valley. So it really isn't too surprising to hear these words about tourists and casual visitors.
It seems strange that visitors to Yosemite should be so little influenced by its novel grandeur, as if their eyes were bandaged and their ears stopped. Most of those I saw yesterday were looking down as if wholly unconscious of anything going on about them, while sublime rocks were trembling with the tones of the mighty chanting congregation of waters gathered from all the mountains round about, making music that might draw angels out of heaven.
And then you probably know people like the shepherd Muir spoke about.
Thus I pressed Yosemite upon him like a missionary offering the gospel, but he would have none of it. I should be afraid to look over so high a wall, he said. It would make my head swim. There is nothing worth seeing anyway, only rocks, and I see plenty of them here. Tourists that spend money to see rocks and falls are fools, that's all. You can't humbug me. I've been in this country too long for that. Such souls, I suppose, are asleep or smothered with and befogged beneath mean pleasures and cares.
In 1903, President Theodore Roosevelt was persuaded to camp in Yosemite with John Muir. The first night was in the Mariposa Grove of big trees that you're looking at. And the second night was at Glacier Point with this view, where they arose in 4 inches of snow. After this exhilarating experience, Theodore Roosevelt went back to Washington and shortly thereafter created, with Congress of course, 5 national parks, 16 national monuments, and set aside 148 million acres as part of the national forest. Now, 3 factors were at work during those nights. Number 1, John Muir was the most effective preacher of the wilderness gospel, even to this day. Number 2, Theodore Roosevelt was an enthusiastic outdoorsman and nature lover. 'Twas he who said of the Grand Canyon, "Leave it as it is, man can only mar it." And number 3, John Muir was by this time representing a larger and very dedicated group called the Sierra Club. Now, while we fully acknowledge that the first 2 factors represent the most potent reasons for the deed, indulge us a little if we hope that the third was also important. When John Muir first got to San Francisco, he endured the big city as long as possible, and for him that was probably a few hours. Then he asked someone how to get out of the city. To the questioning reply, "Where do you want to go?" he answered, "Anywhere that is wild." He was directed through Oakland and on to the Sierra Nevada, the snowy range. You may recognize this quotation since it has been used extensively by environmental groups.
In God's wildness lies the hope of the world, the great, fresh, unblighted, unredeemed wilderness. The galling harness of civilization drops off, and the wounds heal ere we are aware.
Look at the contrast between these 2 scenes, but don't be too surprised that Las Vegas may be preferred by a considerable number of people, probably the majority, and yet.
The poor, insignificant wanderer enjoys the freedom and glory of God's wilderness. Wherever we go in the mountains, or indeed in any of God's wild fields, we find more than we seek.
And I've never heard a visitor to Las Vegas say that they had found more than they were seeking. John Muir's viewpoint was that
the clearest way into the universe is through a forest wilderness. There is a love of wild nature in everybody, and an ancient mother love ever showing itself, whether recognized or no, and however covered by cares and duties.
Later in this presentation, you'll hear a few words about man and his alleged dominion over nature. This next passage deals in its way with what the story is when the tables are turned. Note that the second slide in this passage is the scene of the Battle of the Little Bighorn, Custer's last stand.
Let a Christian hunter go to the Lord's woods and kill his well-kept beasts or wild Indians, and it is well. But let an enterprising specimen of these proper predestined victims go to the houses and fields and kill the most worthless person of the vertical godlike killers. Oh, that is horribly unorthodox, and on the part of the Indians, atrocious murder. Well, have precious little sympathy for the selfish propriety of civilized man. And if a war of the races should occur between wild beasts and Lord Man, I would be tempted to sympathize with the bears.
You might want to spend a little time with that last statement and see where your own sentiments lie. Then John Muir hits once more at 2 points. That it is conceivable that animals and plants have purposes in their own right, separate from man. And number 2, that all are necessary for a complete universe, man and bacteria or virus and everything in between.
Now, it never seems to occur to these far-seeking teachers that nature's object in making animals and plants might possibly be, first of all, the happiness of each one of them, not the creation of all for the happiness of one. Why should man value himself as more than a small part of the one great unit of creation? And what creature of all that the Lord has taken pains to make is not essential to the completeness of that unit, the cosmos? The universe would be incomplete without man, but it would also be incomplete without the smallest transmicroscopic creature that dwells beyond our conceitful eyes and knowledge.
Wilderness and naturalness were the chief criteria for beauty in Muir's eyes. He offered some hope until you see that he is talking about the sky and the sea and the internal core of the earth. And even so, the sea is suffering severe contamination and misuse. Then comes the warning about the happenings on the surface of the earth. Sometimes it seems like the voice of one crying in the wilderness.
None of nature's landscapes are ugly so long as they are wild, and much, we can say comfortingly, must always be in the great part wild, particularly the sea and the sky, the floods of light from the stars, and the warm, unspoilable heart of the earth, infinitely beautiful, though only dimly visible to the eye of imagination. But the continent's outer beauty is fast passing away, especially the plant part of it, the most destructible and the most universally charming of all.
Perhaps you have silently stood in awe in a redwood forest, or strolled in the birch woods in New Hampshire. Let me get you to the birch woods. That's the top of a giant sequoia. And here are some of the birch woods in New Hampshire. Or just sat against a tree trunk and rested in a hardwood forest in Ohio. If in doing any of these things you have felt a gentle current of peace and stillness come over you, you are, at least in regard to the forest, in tune with John Muir.
Come to the woods, for here is rest. There is no repose like that of the green, deep woods. Here grow the wallflower and the violet. The squirrel will come and sit upon your knee. The logcock will wake you in the morning. Sleep in forgetfulness of all ill.
John Muir had a special regard for trees, their wind songs, their movements, their direct tie to their Mother Earth. He once climbed to the top of a tree, a sugar pine, in a storm to hear more clearly the music of the wind in the branches.
It has been said that trees are imperfect men and seem to bemoan their imprisonment rooted in the ground. But they never seem so to me. I never saw a discontented tree.
And then Muir directed his attention towards the greatest threat to trees, man. He gained protection of at least some of the big trees now in Sequoia, Kings Canyon, and Yosemite National Park by an attack on the blasting of these giant sequoias for grape stakes. I'm going to interrupt myself at this point because I have some statistics on the grizzly giant that you're looking at. It's one of the big trees. It's a sequoia in the high country. It's 27.6 feet in diameter, estimated to be 2,700 years old, 209 feet high, and the first branch is 95 feet up. And many of these trees are thousands of years old.
Any fool can destroy trees. They cannot run away, and if they could, they would still be destroyed, chased and hunted down as long as fun or a dollar could be got out of their bark hides, branching horns, or magnificent bold backbones. Few that fell trees plant them, nor would planting avail much towards getting back anything like the noble primeval forest.
And the problem exists today, as witness the cutting of redwoods in the last two slides, right up to the edges of your Redwoods National Park. Turn with us now to a few of the birds that held Muir's interest. I have photographed this little bird, but I couldn't do as good as the artist did on this stamp. It's hard to pick favorites when discussing the feeling of John Muir, but we can safely declare that the water ouzel, or dipper, that's this little guy, was his favorite bird. And while Muir describes him, we'll use a stamp and a museum specimen to show the bird. Two sight pictures to show the habitat, like the water you're seeing, and finally a picture of an ouzel in a stream.
The waterfalls of the Sierra are frequented by only one bird, the ouzel or water thrush. He is a singularly joyous and lovable little fellow, about the size of a robin, clad in a plain waterproof suit of bluish gray. No canyon is too cold for this little bird, none too lonely, provided it be rich in falling water. The ouzel alone of all birds dares to enter a white torrent.
Water ouzels usually nest in the areas around waterfalls and prefer apparently that some spray hit the nest. This is truly a bird for all seasons. And quite a different bird was described by John Muir when he went forth to check the effects of a Yosemite snowstorm.
The Stuller's jays were, of course, making more noise and stir than all the other birds combined, every coming and going with a loud bluster, screaming as if each had a lump of melting sludge in his throat, and taking good care to improve every opportunity afforded by the darkness and confusion of the storm to steal from the acorn stores of the woodpeckers.
Now that you've seen something of the Sierra Nevada, watch a few pictures of mountains across the country and listen to the unfolding of some of Muir's mountain philosophy.
Ink cannot tell the glow that lights me at this moment in turning to the mountains. I'm always glad to touch the living rock again and to dip my head in high mountain sky. For the mountains are fountains of men as well as of rivers, of glaciers, of fertile soil. The great poets, philosophers, prophets, able men whose thoughts and deeds have moved the world have come down from the mountains, mountain dwellers who have grown strong there with forest trees in nature's workshop. We are now in the mountains and they are in us, kindling enthusiasm, making every nerve quiver, filling every pore and cell of us.
Muir, who traveled into the mountains with dried bread and tea, and at times a thin blanket, with no weapon of any kind, had only one close call, a possible fall. He even had the experience of a 2,500-foot descent on the back of a snow avalanche. No animal attack or snake bite, only insects. He did acknowledge that accidents could happen in the mountains, but
fear not, therefore, to try the mountain passes. They will kill care, save you from deadly apathy, set you free, and call forth every faculty into vigorous, enthusiastic action. Even the sick should try these so-called dangerous passes. For every unfortunate they kill, they cure 1,000. No pain here, no dull, empty hours, no fear of the past, no fear of the future. These blessed mountains are so compactly filled with God's beauty, no petty personal hope or experience has room to be. Drinking this champagne water is pure pleasure. So is breathing the living air, and every movement of limbs is pleasure.
sometimes when you're feeling down and the days stretch ahead as though there's no end to cares and duties, flash a mountain scene onto that inner eye and let it work on you for a while.
Oh, these vast, calm, measureless mountain days, inciting at once to work and rest. Days in whose light everything seems equally divine, opening 1,000 windows to show us God. Nevermore, however weary, should one faint by the way, who gains the blessing of one mountain day. Whatever his fate, long life, short life, stormy or calm, he is rich forever.
This next passage is perhaps the most quoted statement that John Muir ever wrote.
Climb the mountains and get their good tidings. Nature's peace will flow into you as sunshine flows into trees. The winds will blow their own freshness into you, and the storms their energy, while cares will drip off like autumn leaves.
Uncovering the broad range of subjects that Muir dealt with, we have somewhat violated his next statement.
When we try to pick out anything by itself, we find it hitched to everything else in the universe.
Now, I'm not sure exactly how you illustrate that particular statement, but we used ladybugs and we used a marmot, a creature that lives at timberline. But does that sound like an ecologist talking? Remember that all of John Muir's words were written before 1915.
One fancies a heart like our own must be beating in every crystal and cell. We feel like stopping to speak to the plants and animals as friendly fellow mountaineers. Nature as a poet, an enthusiastic working man, becomes more and more visible the farther and higher we go. For the mountains are fountains, beginning places, however related to sources beyond mortal kin.
The next three passages show Muir's thinking about the ongoing process of nature and its universality through time and space.
I used to envy the father of our race, dwelling as he did in contact with the new-made fields and plants of Eden. But I do so no more, because I have discovered that I also live in creation's dawn. The morning stars still sing together, and the world not yet half made becomes more beautiful every day.
You'll find this next thought expressed in many places, but not necessarily as poetic.
Nature is ever at work, building and pulling down, creating and destroying, keeping everything whirling and flowing, allowing no rest, but in rhythmical motion, chasing everything in endless song out of one beautiful form into another.
And then the eternal character of nature.
This grand show is eternal. It is always sunrise somewhere. The dew is never all dried at once. A shower is forever falling. Vapor is ever rising. Eternal sunrise, eternal sunset, eternal dawn and gloaming. On sea and continents and islands, each in its turn as the round earth rolls.
Mountain camping and campfires had a special appeal for Muir, for to him,
the deeper the solitude, the less sense of loneliness, and the nearer our friends.
And sometimes when you're out of the city's glare at night, consider this passage.
How hard to realize that every camp of men or beast has a starry firmament for a roof. In such places, standing alone on the mountaintop, it is easy to realize that whatever special nests we make, leaves and moss, like the marmots and birds, or tents or piled stone, we all dwell in a house of one room, the world with the firmament for its roof, and we are sailing the celestial spaces without leaving any tracks.
Now, does that sound like a more recent set of okay words, our fragile spaceship Earth? And for those of us that hurry even more on the Earth's surface than the sailing through space, Muir has a few choice words.
It is impossible to see anything worthwhile from a stagecoach traveling 40 miles a day.
Now that hits us, and a safe bet that it hits you too. Incidentally, that picture is of the Oregon Trail. This next one is the New Jersey Turnpike. Because speed has come to be considered essential. These next scenes, because of distance, are not available to us without a fairly high degree of speed. We seem to quickly run out of time and money. Now let's spend a few moments with some of Muir's short passages dealing with parks and places outside the Sierra Nevada.
The Grand Canyon is a vast wilderness of rocks in a sea of light, colored and glowing like oak and maple woods in autumn, when the sun gold is richest. But colors, the living, rejoicing colors, chanting morning and evening in chorus to heaven. Whose brush or pencil, however lovingly inspired, can give us these? The Yellowstone Park is a big, wholesome wilderness on the broad summit of the Rocky Mountains, favored with an abundance of rain and snow. Besides the treasures common to most mountain regions that are wild and blessed with a kind climate, the park is full of exciting wonders. The wildest geysers in the world are dancing and singing in it.
And there's a canyon with waterfalls that you'll carry with you forever. Those are the lower falls of the Yellowstone, the upper falls of the Yellowstone, and this is the lower falls of the Yellowstone. And then if you turn and look up towards Montana, you get a view of the canyon itself. And then Mount Hood, which is not a national park, but it is a volcanic peak in the Cascade Range in Oregon.
The whole mountain appeared as one glorious manifestation of divine power, enthusiastic and benevolent, flowing like a countenance with ineffable repose and beauty, before which we could only gaze in devout and lowly admiration.
And another Cascade Range peak, Mount Rainier, which is a national park. Go ahead.
If in the making of the West, nature had what we call parks in mind, places for rest, inspiration, and prayers, this Rainier region must surely be one of them. In the center of it, there is a lovely mountain capped with ice. From the ice cap, glaciers radiate in every direction, and young rivers from the glaciers, while its flanks, sweeping down in beautiful curves, are clad with forests and gardens and filled with birds and animals.
He also went into what is now Glacier National Park, part of the Rocky Mountains in Montana.
Wander here a whole summer if you can. Thousands of God's wild blessings will search and soak you, as if you were a sponge, and the big days will go by uncounted. The time will not be taken from the sum of your life. Instead of shortening, it will indefinitely lengthen it and make you truly immortal. Nevermore will time seem short or long, and cares will never again fall heavily on you, but gently and kindly as gifts from heaven.
It was mentioned earlier that John Muir was almost blinded. After his recovery, light had a special meaning for him. In a letter to a friend, he outdid himself speaking about light.
And what light has filled me since that time? I am sure you will be glad to know the richest sun gold flooding these California valleys, the spiritual alpenglow steeping the high peaks, silver light on the seas, the white glancing sun spangles on rivers and lakes, light of the myriad stars on the snow, light sifting through angles of sun-beaten icebergs, light in glacial caves, iris spray wafting from the white waterfalls, and the light of the calm, starry nights beheld from mountaintops dipping deep into the clear air.
Still speaking of light, a few words about his beloved Sierra Nevada.
Then it seemed to me that the Sierra should be called not the Nevada or Snowy Range, but the Range of Light. And after 10 years of wandering and wondering in the heart of it, it still seems above all others the Range of Light.
Since the Sierra Nevada played such a prominent part in John Muir's life, let's place them for you. We're going in over here, and this is the great Central Valley of California, and these are the Sierra Nevada, especially where you see the snow capped there. Yosemite is somewhere in this area, and Sequoia and Kings Canyon down in this area. This is the San Francisco area at that point. Now, Mount Whitney is the highest peak in the lower 48, and that's in Sequoia. That's about down in here. And in Death Valley, right in this area, is the lowest point in the 48 states, and that's a minus 282 feet. That minus is below sea level. It was to protect these mountains that 4 people, including John Muir, formed the Sierra Club in 1892. One of the main reasons was expressed by John Muir when he detected signs of domestic sheep in the high country.
A trail had been made down the mountainside from the north, and all the gardens and meadows here destroyed by a horde of hoofed locusts, as if swept by a fire. The money changers were in the temple.
Tuolumne Meadows in Yosemite was one of the haunts of the sheep herders. Now there's still a vast array of money changers, many of whom have a lot of money, and I have brought you over into Minnesota, and this is the Mesabi iron ore range. But the Sierra Club is still in the John Muir business of trying to preserve some of God's wilderness temples. We believe it is absolutely necessary to preserve areas such as the high country meadows Muir here describes.
To think that after the sheep should be allowed in these lily meadows, after how many centuries of nature's care, planting and watering them, tucking the bulbs in snugly below winter frost, shading the tender shoots with clouds drawn above them like curtains, pouring forth refreshing rain, making them perfect in beauty, and keeping them safe by 1,000 miracles. Yet, strange to say, allowing the trampling of devastating sheep. One might reasonably look for a wall of fire to fence such gardens. So extravagant is nature with her choicest treasures, spending plant beauty as she spends sunshine, pouring it forth into land and sea, garden and desert. And so the beauty of lilies falls on angels and man, bears and squirrels, wolves and sheep, birds and bees. But as far as I have seen, man alone and the animals he tames destroy these gardens.
We hope you notice that he spoke again about domestic sheep. He knew about them firsthand because one of his first jobs in California was helping herd sheep into the pastures of the Sierra Nevada. But while he spoke of domestic sheep as hoofed locusts, his words for this guy, the mountain sheep, glowed with enthusiasm. Besides the mountain sheep in this next set of slides, you'll see mountain goats, a nanny with her kid, and then a habitat picture.
The wild sheep ranks among the noblest of animal mountaineers. They bring forth their young in the most solitary and inaccessible crags, far above the nest of the eagle. I have frequently come upon the beds of the ewes and lambs at an elevation of from 12,000 to 13,000 feet above sea level.
But if you were a part of nature, you didn't have to be lodged to attract Muir's notice. Listen to these words about bees.
In this flowery wilderness, the bees rove and revel, rejoicing in the bounty of the sun, clamoring eagerly through bramble and huckleblum.
We're going to direct our attention for a few minutes to glaciers and John Muir's study and poetic description of them. Somehow a glacier never seemed cold when Muir was talking about it. When John Muir put out his theory of the formation of Yosemite Valley by glacial action, he was attacked by one of the leading geologists of the day, Josiah Whitney. Whitney's view held that a cataclysmic wrench of the earth simply caused the bottom to fall out. He held that there had never been a living glacier in Yosemite. And even at that time, John Muir found one in the Sierras. Now, the ones that you are seeing are in Alaska. But this is the type of description Muir used in explaining the process.
It is hard without long and loving study to realize the magnitude of the work done on these mountains during the last glacial period by glaciers, which are only streams of closely compacted snow crystals. Careful study of the phenomena presented goes to show that the pre-glacial condition of the range was comparatively simple. One vast wave of stone in which 1,000 mountains, domes, canyons, ridges lay concealed. And in the development of these, nature chose for a tool not the earthquake or lightning to rend and split asunder, nor the stormy torrent or eroding rain, but the tender snow flowers, noiselessly falling through unnumbered centuries, the offspring of the sun and the sea. Laboring harmoniously in united strength, they crushed and ground and wore away the rocks in their march, making vast beds of soil, and at the same time developed and fashioned the landscapes into delightful variety of hill and dale and lordly mountain that mortals call beauty.
Actually, later geologists have revised his theory to include more credit to pre-glacial river cutting and then more than one invasion of ice. Muir went a little further in talking about snow flowers. Now look hard on this. There's a seal in there, but I was having a little camera problem. But there is a seal. Muir went a little further in talking about snow flowers.
Then, after their grand task was done, these band of snow flowers, these mighty glaciers, were melted and removed as if of no more importance than dew destined to last but an hour.
John Muir was enchanted with Alaska's glaciers. He discovered Glacier Bay and used those glaciers as his great proving grounds of theories developed in the valleys of California's high Sierras. Now move back with us to the Sierra Nevada, where John Muir is describing a landscape carved by glaciers.
The sculpture of the landscape is as striking in its main lines as in its lavish richness of detail. A grand congregation of massive heights with a river shining between, each carved into smooth, graceful folds without leaving a single rocky angle exposed, as if the delicate fluting and ridging fashioned out of metamorphic slates had been carefully sandpapered. The whole landscape showed design like man's noblest sculptures. How wonderful the power of its beauty.
Now let's move to something which is somewhat less substantial and see what he has to say about it.
Another midday cloudland displaying power and beauty that one never wearies in beholding, but hopelessly unsketchable and untellable. What can poor mortals say about clouds, while a description of their huge glowing domes, ridges, shadowy gulfs and canyons and feather-edged ravines is being tried? They vanish, leaving no visible ruins. Nevertheless, these fleeting sky mountains are as substantial and significant as the more lasting upheavals of granite beneath them. Both alike are built up and die, and in God's calendar, difference of duration is nothing.
And that's Devil's Tower in Wyoming, and yes, it is not granite, it is basalt. Another enchanting force in nature is water. And one of John Muir's special forms of water was the spray of a waterfall.
At the bottom of the fall, there is but little distinction of form visible. It is mostly a hissing, clashing, seething, upwhirling mass of scud and spray, through which the light sifts in gray and purple tones. In the boiling clouds of spray, there is no confusion, while the rainbow light makes all divine, adding glorious beauty and peace to glorious power.
Follow on down from the waterfall or go up above it, and perhaps you'll be lucky enough to see something like this.
There is nothing more eloquent in nature than a mountain stream. Its banks are luxuriantly peopled with rare and lovely flowers and overarching trees, making it one of nature's coolest and most hospitable places.
Scenes like this flood all the senses with pure pleasure. The soothing tones and coolness of the water, the smell of conifers in the sun, The smoothness of the stones and the sheer beauty of the whole scene caused Muir oftentimes to write like this.
This has been a big feast day. Plants, animals, birds, rocks, gardens, magnificent clouds, thunderstorms, rain, hail, all have blessed me.
And then the day ends. But this next passage starts in speaking of the dawn. And here's a spectacular view of peaks in early morning at Glacier National Park. And I wish I could say I took it, but it was taken by a person named Lou Hannum.
Next to the light of dawn on high mountain tops, the alpenglow is the most impressive of all, the terrestrial manifestations of God. Now comes the gloaming. The alpenglow is fading into earth, murky gloom, but do not let your town habits draw you away to the hotel.
We know that we have too many pictures in here, but we still like to leave them in. And this is where you're not supposed to go because you will miss this. Or you might miss scenes like this. The artificial pressures of civilization were a thorn in the side of John Muir. He had no love for anything that separated people from nature. Now this is a view in Akron, Ohio, clear view from 5 Points, and here it is when smog is down.
Our crude civilization engenders a multitude of wants, and lawgivers are ever at wit's end devising. The hall and the theater and the church have been invented, and compulsory education. Why not add compulsory recreation? Our forefathers forged chains of duty and habit which bind us, notwithstanding our boasted freedom. And we ourselves in desperation add link to link, groaning and making medicinal laws for relief. Yet few think of pure rest or of the healing power of nature. How hard it is to pull or shake people out of town. Earthquakes cannot do it, nor even plagues. These only cause the civilized to pray and ring bells and cower in corners of bedrooms and churches.
Much of the time, Muir spoke in rather disheartening terms about people.
Most people are on the world, not in it, have no conscious sympathy or relationship to anything about them, undiffused, separate, and rigidly alone, like marbles of polished stone, touching but separate.
In the picture Paint Your Wagon, Ben, played by Lee Marvin, was a cruddy old character, but he expressed it in these words. God made the mountain, God made the sky, God made the people, God knows why. But once in a while, Muir saw a tiny spark of hope.
The tendency nowadays to wander in wilderness is delightful to see. Thousands of tired, nerve-shaken, over-civilized people are beginning to find that going to the mountains is going home, that wilderness is a necessity, and the mountain parks and reservations are useful not only as fountains of timber and irrigating rivers, but as the fountains of life, awakening from the stupefying effects of the vices of over-industry and deadly apathy of luxury. They are trying as best they can to mix and enrich their own little ongoings with those of nature and to get rid of rust and disease.
John Muir was especially hard on those who picked up the biblical words about all things created for man, while not bothering to read the demands for faithful stewardship of the earth and all of nature. This that you're looking at is a process called channelization. It takes a beautiful meandering stream and straightens it. This rather long passage referred to earlier, read in certain tones, might be passed off on you as pure Mark Twain, but it is strictly John Muir.
The world, we are told, was made especially for man, a presumption not supported by all the facts. A numerous class of men are painfully astonished whenever they find anything, living or dead, in all God's universe, which they cannot eat or render in some way what they call useful to themselves. They have a precise dogmatic insight of the intentions of the Creator, and it is hardly possible to be guilty of irreverence in speaking of their God any more than of heathen idols. He is regarded as a civilized, law-abiding gentleman, in favor either of a republican form of government or of a limited monarchy, believes in the literature and language of England, is a warm supporter of the English Constitution and Sunday schools and missionary societies, and is as purely a manufactured article as any puppet in a halfpenny theater. With such views of the Creator, it is, of course, not surprising that erroneous views should be entertained of the creation. To such properly trimmed people, the sheep, for example, it is an easy problem. Food and clothing for us. Eating grass and daisies, white by divine appointment for this predestined purpose, on perceiving the demand for wool that would be occasioned by the eating of the apple in the Garden of Eden.
And here are some of those domestic sheep. What we tried to do through this last grouping of slides is show you contrast. And I thought it appropriate that we should end that passage with little old Las Vegas. John Muir held out hope, not absolute joyful hope, but possibilities and little favorable signs tempered by backsliding and power and money-hungry grabbing.
This natural beauty hunger is made manifest in our magnificent national parks, the Yellowstone, Yosemite, Sequoia, nature's sublime wonderlands, the admiration and the joy of the world. Nevertheless, like anything else worthwhile, from the very beginning, however well guarded, they have always been subject to attack and despoiling gainseekers and mischief makers of every degree, from Satan to senator.
This picture was taken from Sequoia National Park and shows pollution hanging over the San Joaquin Valley at about 10,000 feet.
There will be a period of indifference on the part of the rich, sleepy with wealth, and on the toiling millions, sleepy with poverty, most of whom never saw a forest. A period of screaming protest and objection from the plunderers who are as unconscionable and enterprising as Satan. But light is surely coming, and the friends of destruction will preach and bewail in vain.
But hope didn't always win. There were times when the end of it all seemed near. One of these was when San Francisco wanted to dam Hetch Hetchy Valley in Yosemite National Park.
These temple destroyers, devotees of ravishing commercialism, seem to have a perfect contempt for nature, and instead of lifting their eyes to the God of the mountains, lift them to the almighty dollar. Dam Hetch Hetchy? As well dam for water tanks the people's cathedrals and churches, for no holier temple has ever been consecrated by the heart of man.
But Hetch Hetchy was dammed and destroyed, and this is the dam. Now, in my puzzle here of Yosemite Valley, can you picture water coming up to about that line on the lower falls of Yosemite? Because that's what they wanted to do. That was when the Sierra Club came forcefully into the public eye in California. And that dam was no doubt in the minds of the club leaders when it went national in the 1950 successful fight to keep 2 Bureau of Reclamation dams out of Dinosaur National Monument on the Colorado-Utah border. Had those dams been constructed, this picture would look quite different, for this is Echo Park, one of the dam sites. And this is the Green River flowing west after passing Echo Park. And the next stop was over by the Visitor Center in Utah, and it was supposed to be another dam there. This is the Grand Coulee Dam, damming the Columbia River up in Washington. But the damming of a river is so final that by rights all people should have a say in such a decision. And their right has not been guaranteed by allowing comment while the waters climb the canyon walls. We're not sure that we'll ever see another man like John Muir, but we do hope that the Sierra Club does now and will in the future follow his principles and stay in tune with nature. We seek not to conquer or subdue nature, but to live in harmony with her. In a National Geographic article on John Muir, someone said about Mount Shasta, the mountain you're looking at, you don't conquer such a mountain, you are permitted to walk on it. We hope that someday that will be everyone's attitude towards the whole earth. This man wrote 9 books, 425 separate published items, and 60 travel journals. He played a direct motivating role in the creation of these national parks, Yosemite, and you've seen a number of pictures of that, Sequoia, which you're looking at, and Kings Canyon you have seen, Mount Rainier, and I have these mixed. I have Petrified Forest and then Mount Rainier, and he was responsible in large measures for those, and he did a lot of work on giving us the Grand Canyon as you see it today. He was a guiding light of the 1906 Antiquities Act, that's sometimes called the National Monument Act, which laid the groundwork for Theodore Roosevelt's action and that of other presidents. This was his California home, where much of his writing was done. John Muir's name was on Ralph Waldo Emerson's small list of great people. It was put there after Emerson's California visit. Emerson was in his 70s and Muir was only 33 at the time, and Emerson already saw his greatness. Now let's close with a quote from the National Geographic. Father of Yosemite National Park, savior of the sequoias, guiding light of the national park movement, explorer and mountaineer, naturalist and mystic, advisor to presidents and gadfly to the establishment. Such was John Muir, America's apostle of wilderness.